On this episode of Still Loading, I've never told anyone, but I've always thought they were lighthouses. Billions of lighthouses stuck at the far end of the sky. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Still Loading Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Koval, and today on the show, I have a wonderful guest prepared for you and a wonderful topic as well. Today on the show, we are going to be discussing the indie darling To the Moon, which came out on November 1st, 2011. But before we go any further and in discussing this game, I want to introduce my guest for this episode. Today on the show, I have Anthony from the Indie Diarist Podcast. Anthony, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Josh. And lovely to be on Still Loading after we did our own little collab. And I think this episode may come out before our collab episodes.
I think so.
So yeah, because got a very big backlog. But yes, so nice to be here.
Thank you for coming on. I've been looking forward to this. Yes, listeners, I will also be on the Indie Diarist podcast, so be on the lookout for that. I think you said sometime in August, right? Or was it September?
It's going to be August, I believe. Well, I can double check for you, but yeah, definitely. It's going to be soon anyway.
So yes, in August. But before we go even further, let's hear a little about the Indie Diarist. Anthony, tell all my listeners about like who you are, kind of what you do, and what the Indie Diarist is all about.
Of course. So my name is Anthony, as Josh already said, and I'm the host and founder of the Indie Diarist Podcast, which is a show on the human stories behind indie game development. Basically, what I do on the Indie Diarist is just find some of the most compelling, positive, lovely, and just heartwarming stories from the indie game development community. Find those people and bring them on the show so that we can talk about how they got into game development, how they how they're finding it, and of course talking about their current projects. And the podcast is actually very young. It's not. It wasn't founded when Still Loading was founded, which is
very few are. I'm an old man.
That is true. But yeah, the Indie Diarist was just founded in January 2023, and it's growing very fast, which makes me very proud. And actually, as I was discussing with Josh before recording this episode, by the time this episode of Still Loading comes out, I will have launched Patreon and Ko-fi for my podcast. And you can find all the relevant links, including links to the show, on theindiediarist.com.
And I will include a link for the indiediarist.com on the show notes. And of course, Anthony, we're going to have a spot for you at the end to shout it out again as well, just to double dip on those promos. I don't mind that. I like that when people do that for me. So yes, we're going to discuss the game called To the Moon. Now, listeners, a little behind the scenes. When I ask guests to come on, especially when it's someone I don't have, I haven't been able to chat with as much as I would like to, though Anthony and I have been able to chat a bunch, which has been awesome. But to get to know them, I usually ask my guests like, hey, what are 5 or 6 of your favorite games? Just doesn't have to be of all time, just list 5. What's the first that come to your mind? And on Anthony's list here was To the Moon. And I've heard of this game before. I actually want to shout out my buddy Pat Hickey Jr. once again. I shouted him out actually the very last episode for Medal of Honor. He wrote a book called The Minds Behind the Games, or he interviewed a bunch of developers, and he interviewed the developer of this game, Con Gao. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing their name correctly, but he interviewed him, and so I got to do some of my research came from that book. Some of it came from other places, but I want to shout out Pat nonetheless because he's an awesome dude, and his books do help me research the topics for my games. So yeah, but to throw back over to you, Anthony, what made you put this game on your list, and kind of what does it mean to you?
Well, To the Moon to me means a lot of different things, and they're all very positive and also very heartwarming. I think the reason that made me put To the Moon into the list that you asked me to do is that To the Moon is very special to me in a lot of different ways. One, it is one of the first indie games that I reviewed when I started writing about games online.
Okay.
And that was when I was working for an Italian video game website. By the way, I'm native Italian, which you may have heard from my accent, which is all over the place. But yeah, so it's one of the first indie games that I reviewed, and it made me realize how compelling stories in games can be, what you can really do with the interactive medium. And then after I loved it and cried my eyes out while playing it, I played it again with my sister, and I have a very close relationship with my sister. I think she's very talented. She's an incredible artist and studying architecture back home in Palermo. And she loved it as well. So it was one of the last games that we played together before I left for the UK. And so I still cherish that memory and still hold it very close to my heart.
That's really cool. That's wonderful. I love stuff like that. I love it when games can. That's the part of games that I don't feel like gets touched on enough. You know, like how the connections that they build with people who you're close to. For my own personal connections to this game, it was my first time playing it when you asked me to. So I came at it from a very different lens. Like there's no nostalgia involved with this, but there is a lot of it, like this game got me to think a lot, and I won't spoil what just yet because we're not to the spoiler section. I'm going to take a page out of Dave Jackson's Tales from the Backlog podcast, because this game is this is a bit of a spoiler for the podcast, not for the game. This game is very light on gameplay, extremely light on gameplay. It is much more story focused and story driven. So that's where the meat of this episode is going to be at. So I will throw up a spoiler wall when we get to the spoiler section of the game. So that way, if you have not played it, you can give it a shot. But this game, what I really enjoyed about it, and I really think it was what Con Gao, the developer, really wanted, is that he wanted to make people think. He, in some of the interviews that I read, he kind of, like, the way he approached writing the game is that he kind of picked this emotion. He first decided the emotion that he wanted to convey to the player, and then he started writing a story to make players feel that emotion. And one of the ones that he talks about, and it's kind of hard because, I think, and almost wisely, he doesn't stick to one emotion or the other. It's like it kind of lets you as the player figure out, like, what am I feeling out of this? So it's not like he went into it and be like, I want players to feel sad or mad. It's more kind of along the lines of like these complex emotions. I kind of equate it to, and this is not a spoiler for the themes or anything like that, but in terms of like things like art that really gets you thinking. This is a bit of a non sequitur, but I don't know when else I could bring this up on a video game podcast. Have you ever heard of the song by James Blunt, Monsters?
No, but I do know James Blunt, of course. I know a few of his songs, but not that one specifically.
So Monsters is about him coming to grips with his father's mortality.
Okay.
His father was diagnosed with cancer. Bit of a spoiler for in a good way. His father is still alive, but at the time it was not looking promising. So he wrote this song called Monsters. And the whole idea of it is, well, first off, I can just say it destroyed me, dude. Like the first time I listened to it, I wept. Because my dad's still alive, God bless him, and he's still doing pretty well in terms of health. But it is still that very real feeling of coming to grips with realizing your parents are mortal and they're not always going to be there. And that destroyed me because I love my parents very dearly, very dearly. I can't speak right now. And in the song, the chorus kind of goes, like, I'm not your son. You're not my father. We're just two grown men saying goodbye. No need to forgive. No need to forget. I know your mistakes and you know mine. And while you're sleeping, I'll try to make you proud. So daddy, won't you just close your eyes? Don't be afraid. It's my turn to chase the monsters away.
Wow. Yeah. That's,
dude,
that's
I'm not
very
even
powerful.
singing it. I'm just reciting it. Imagine he in the music video that he does for it, he's like borderline weeping. It's just a single like close up of his face, the entire music video, just him barely holding it together, getting through the song.
Well, I bet.
Because,
I mean,
yeah, well, it's just that lyric. And the reason I bring it up, the reason I even equate it and I bring it up on a To the Moon episode is that there are very few bits of art and artistic medium that I'm able to like take in and really just it makes me experience emotion that I knew I had, but I've never seen represented. So To the Moon does that for me, but James Blunt's Monsters, without spoiling To the Moon, also it kind of feels like a parallel, if that makes sense.
I see what you mean. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So that was my experience with this game. It wasn't necessarily nostalgia, but it was a very real, like, oh my God, this is an emotion that I always knew I had, but I never saw expressed.
Yeah. And I think it's something that a lot of game designers do when they approach making, well, a lot of good game designers do when they approach making a new game, which is, what is the kind of experience, what is the kind of emotion that I want the player to feel? Mm-hmm. And what I think is very powerful about To the Moon is that Kangao was able to not just get one emotion, because emotions can always be seen as black or white, but get a full spectrum and show that emotions are like in the gray area. That's where emotions happen. That's where humanity happens. And takes place. So I think it is really powerful. And also, I wanted to say I'm humbled that I was the person who pushed you to play this game, because I know that a few people recommended it to you before, as you mentioned as well. But
no one actually had. But like I've heard about it. I was something where I was looking, like it's one of those things where it's like, oh, that sounds interesting. I'll get around to playing it. And it's a curse and a blessing with the podcast, with content creation, where it's like sometimes there's a game I want to play, but if it's not for the show, then I feel like I'm wasting my time. But then so that's the curse part. But the blessing is, hey, I've really been thinking about playing this game, and now I get to for the show. And I didn't even realize I already owned it. I owned this in my Steam library. I'm like, I don't even have to spend $1 for this guy.
Yeah, that happens with me all the time as well.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
So the emotion that Kangao was trying to, that I shouldn't say that he was trying to relay to the player, but at least where he was coming from when he was writing the story was, there's two parts to it. One, his grandfather suffered like some type of cardiac issue. I don't know if it was a heart attack or like a heart failure thing. His grandfather, I don't know if his grandfather's still alive, but his grandfather did survive at least the incident that kind of semi-inspired this game. And the other half is like, after that event happened, he started thinking, well, when I pass away, what am I going to have any regrets? Like, what am I going to leave behind? Not necessarily legacy, though that was a part of it. It was definitely a thought in the game. But just kind of like, will I have any regrets? Is there something that I wish I would have done that I never did do? That kind of thing.
It's true, and I see what you mean. And also remember from from the times that I played To the Moon, that really, I mean, this is something maybe that we can discuss more in the spoiler territory, but I don't think that the illness portrayed in To the Moon is ever spelled out entirely. Like, the Kangao doesn't say what it was. It could be anything. It could be cancer, it could be cardiac problems, but it just leaves you there dealing with the consequences without delving too much into the details. So yeah, I think it is very powerful.
Agreed. To set up what this game is actually about for the people who have not played it, we've danced around kind of the inspirations for it, but to set up what the actual synopsis of this game is, it's honestly, it was very sci-fi. I was not expecting that in the slightest. The basic premise is you play as two characters, sort of. You kind of trade off. We usually only play as one, but you do trade off which one you control. Dr. Ava Rosaline and Dr. Neil Watts. They work for a company or corporation called the Sigmund Corporation, and they are contractors, sort of. They basically, super rich people hire this company to kind of rearrange their memories. Like they have a final wish that each person who hires his corporation and contracts them says, I have this wish and I want you to go into my memories, rearrange stuff to make me believe that I actually did it. And it's usually right on their deathbed. It's not something that you do when you have like 20 years left. Otherwise you're just living in a false reality. But that would be really fucked up just to think about that. Just like, yeah, you're still in good health. You could live for another 40 years and you're just living in a completely fictionalized version of your own life. But in this game, in this world, it's meant for people on their deathbed. So if they had, part of their will is that, before I die, I want this company to come in and rearrange my memories, and they pick this. It could be anything. So in this instance, this character, I believe his name is John, if I remember
Johnny,
correctly.
I think, yeah.
Yeah, John, or you find out later he's called Johnny by everyone else in his life. And they are called to his deathbed to rearrange his memories, and they don't know what exactly it is. So they actually have to go into his memories, and it's kind of Inception-like, where though apparently I did research, this was not inspired by Inception. This came out, I think, like around the same year or close to when Inception came out. Inception came out in 2010, I believe.
I think I don't remember like specifically, but I do believe that To the Moon came out before Inception, or before Inception became super popular anyway.
So To the Moon came out the year after Inception, but as you and I both know with game design, games aren't generally designed in 1 year, especially an indie game. So I believe he said like it was like if there was any connection to it, it was unintentional. That's what Kangao said. But what Dr. Rosaline and Dr. Watts have to do is that they have to go back into his memories, almost like one memory back, the most recent one they can find, so they can ask him, they can interact with these memories, like it's almost like walking, like traveling back in time, sort of. And they flat out ask him, like, what do you want? Like, what is it that, because we can't ask you, you're not able to speak to us. And he goes, oh, I want to go to the moon. And they ask him, okay, well, we need to know why you want to, so that way when we go back to your memories, we can make it believable. We can't just plant something as nowhere. We have to have some semblance of grounding for this idea to take hold, so that way the rest of your mind can piece everything together. And John goes, I don't know. I just know that that's my last wish. Mm-hmm. So this is where the crux of the plot comes in, where Ava and Neil have to go back through all of Johnny's memories and piece together what exactly he wanted, like what his life was, why he wants to go to the moon in the first place. And that's the setup. That's all I can really say without giving away any spoilers. That's all I can really talk about going into this. So Anthony, I gotta ask you, when you first heard of this game, when you first started playing it, did you know about that premise, or like what kind of, so you said you played it for review at first. Was it something you had heard of prior to this, or was it something straight up like the site you worked for was like, hey, this is a new game, go review it?
I think actually, now that I think about it, I think my memories are kind of distorted there, because I didn't write the review for this game, but I played it at the time when a colleague reviewed it. Then later on, I did a review after it came out, like years after it came out.
Oh, okay.
But it was around the time that I started reviewing indie games, so that's why I was confused there. And I've been believing for the longest time that I'd reviewed this, but actually I did, but not exactly when it came out. I'd played it when it came out, though, and I think I don't remember exactly how it happened, because that's like about 10 years ago now or something. But essentially, I believe it was that I saw it played by a few people. I saw people online praising this game and say, "Oh yeah, To the Moon, it's beautiful," and all that. I was like, okay, let's just give it a try. And what I like to do with games, actually, is usually go in completely blind, or as blind as possible. Like maybe I see a screenshot, maybe I see a quick snippet of a video, but I like to go into, if it's something that I know is going to be an interesting experience for me, I like to just make sure that I make full experience of it, without having any bias, without having any kind of preconception, nothing like that. I only knew maybe the art style, had seen a few screenshots. I knew it was a nice story. So I played it, and then the rest is history. But that's, I believe, how I came in contact with the game.
Okay. So I was just curious because, I set up all the groundwork for this, and I was curious, like, was it the story that captivated you? But it was the praise. It was like everything kind of leading up to it. For me, because I didn't know, I never even heard of this game not until you requested it, but till I read it in Pat Hickey's book, where I'm like, what is this To the Moon game? And it's talking about it being critically acclaimed, and the story, the reason I asked that in the moment, because I was realizing afterwards, I'm like, that could seem like a hard left turn. It made sense in my head, but I realized maybe for the listener, it might not make a whole lot of sense. The reason I ask is because for me, after reading that book, I was like, oh, what's this like story about remixing memories? Like, that seems really interesting. So I was hooked from that initial concept of just the idea of remixing memories and letting someone live their life the way or think they lived their life the way they wanted to, like in this ideal way, which honestly, like, it does raise a lot of moral questions, even from that concept. Like, what is that okay? Is that morally, is that ethical?
Is that ethical? Exactly. Yeah. Well, I think I found it thanks to all the word of mouth and all the streamers to have, well, actually there were YouTubers at the time doing it on their channels, but then I stayed for the story, as you say. I mean, as soon as I realized that the story was something like that, remixing memories and making sure that your death wish can come true, that hooked me from the very beginning. And I think the story is definitely the most fleshed out part of this game. But I'm sure we will get into this shortly.
Well, let's get into the gameplay right now. Actually, and the visuals, we can kind of talk about all of that together. Not because they kind of, the visuals are simplistic. They are 16-bit kind of Super Nintendo, maybe slightly enhanced Super Nintendo. They're appealing to me, and I think they do wonders for the story in a weird sense, because similarly to what a book does, where it's like a book doesn't have pictures, and so you have, it's theater of the mind, you're crafting what the world looks like in your own mind, and it's different for everybody's worldview type of thing. I think To the Moon, kind of, because the graphics are more simplistic, especially when this came out, was at a time when, like 16-bit aesthetics weren't the popular thing. Now they're relatively popular, even among people who did not grow up with the Super Nintendo and NES and stuff like that, and Genesis or Mega Drive.
And about that, actually, I think To the Moon gave rise to a whole new movement of games made in RPG Maker, because it was made in RPG Maker entirely. And from that point on, then a lot of very small indie or auteur little experiences started popping up here and there. A lot of horror experiences, especially. Like, there were a lot of interesting RPG Maker horrors at the time that were very narrative. Yeah. They were very narrative, and they were going very well on YouTube. Like PewDiePie would do them all the time, or other content creators would do them all the time. But they kind of came out around the same time when To the Moon became popular. But I do agree. Like, it's the simplicity of the style and the fact that RPG Maker is such a very lightweight engine. It allowed Kangao to focus on the story and let the player fill the gaps of the stage directions and all the different things that happen and that make the story so good. So it's definitely, like, even though the art style is very simple, as you say, I think it played a very interesting role in making the story work.
I think it forced the players' imaginations to take a much more active role in the experience. Like, you have to really kind of piece things together, because the game isn't doing it for you. It doesn't make you necessarily piece things together narratively, but in terms of, like, the visual language of the game, it conveys just enough where you can get the idea of what Gal's intent is, but it allows you to kind of, like, it allows you to flesh the world out a little bit more on your own, almost like a book, if that makes sense, but through visual language, which I guess is kind of interesting. In terms of the gameplay itself, I mentioned before, gameplay is super light, and it is. It's incredibly brief. It's incredibly simple, and that's not necessarily a knock on it, though I do understand. I've had a few people who popped into my stream when I played this not really enjoy the gameplay, and that's honestly valid, because the gameplay is really simple. For basically the way it works is as you go through each of the memories, you collect different items, and they're usually important to the story. So I won't list what any of the items are. They could be something as simple as, actually this one is a funny joke. It's not necessarily a spoiler, so I can go with that. Something as simple as a jar of pickles is something that you have to pick up. It's not a huge spoiler, don't worry, I didn't ruin anything for you. It ends up becoming a funny joke, though a joke that does tie into the overall narrative, which is why this writing is so good. But anyway, it could be something as simple as that, and you have to pick up 3 or 4, I think about 5 items in each memory, and then once you collect all 5, it allows you to move back to the next level, or to the next memory. And then there are little puzzle segments that you have to use that at the end of each memory. Basically, it's a really simplistic puzzle where you have an image broken up into, I think, a grid of like 4x4 or like 5x5 or something like that.
Yeah, like some tiles and such. Yeah.
Yep. And you have to flip them all over, but the catch is that like, you can only flip them in rows or columns. So let's say you look at the top row of 5, right? And the first 2 are face up, the second 2 are face down, and the 5th one is face up again. If you flip those tiles, it flips the entire row. So now instead of the first 2 being face down, now they're face up. Instead of the 3rd and 4th one being face up, now they're face down. Stuff like that. So it flips the whole thing. So you have to be, it's designed around you having to make sure you select the correct columns to flip each thing. Columns and rows, you can select both. And also you can flip one diagonal straight up from the bottom left to the top right. And that's it. You can't do any other diagonal. So a lot of the puzzles revolve around that. That's pretty much it. There is some mild combat sections, which there's not much. I can't say what you're fighting because that does spoil some things, but there's not much to the combat. You can't die. The enemies just kind of push you back. So if anything, they impede your progress, but they don't necessarily kill you, and you have to you don't lose a life or you don't lose progress. It's more or less you have to. It's kind of like a wall that's pushing you back. So you have to kill them enough to push the wall forward, so that way you can continue moving forward and moving through the story. So there is the only real punishment for not doing well in these combat sections is it slows your progress in the game down. That's pretty much it. Other than that, that's pretty much literally all the gameplay that I can think of in this game. Is there anything you want to add to that, Anthony? Anything that I missed or anything you want to comment on? What are your thoughts on the gameplay?
So I think to your point, the fact that many people find it, let's say, underwhelming, it's fair, because even I didn't remember the tile mechanics. So what I remembered about those puzzles was that there were, in fact, tiles. But I didn't remember the flip mechanic. I think I remember that you had to rearrange them somehow, like when you have the little square, like the manual puzzles that you just move the little tiles around and then you rearrange and you make the picture. I didn't remember the flipping mechanic, and that is because the gameplay isn't really the strong part of this game. And as you say, you can't die. There really isn't a challenge apart from finding the pieces of the puzzle and the pieces of memories that then you put together so that you can progress. And I think that's intentional, because Kan Gao probably wanted to just tell a story as railroady as possible, and without the player going off track too much, or without having to feel frustrated by lack of progress or repeating certain sections. And so in that sense, it works very well. But also what I remember is there was some mild interaction with the environment as well. Like you could, it's very textual. So there are a lot of dialogues. There are some dialogue choices, but they don't change the story in any way. They just give you more context, more narrative context, and you can just go back and listen to them again most of the times. But you can interact with pieces of the scenario or of the levels. Just see what that document on the desk is, or see what that plush may be. Something like that. And you get a comment that gives you more narrative context, and then you piece everything together so you can move forward. It's kind of the same approach that all those RPG Maker games then adopted, like having interactable elements in the scenario. But of course, most of them, if not all of them, weren't exactly as well written as To the Moon, or as well fleshed out in a narrative sense as To the Moon. So usually it would be flavor text, but nothing that would really add to the context or story. So yeah.
I think that's an important thing to note, though, is that, like you were saying, it allows you to explore, and it adds more context to the narrative, because there is stuff you can miss. It's never like anything too, I don't know. There's stuff you can miss, but it what I like about it is that it rewards exploration for the players. Where if it's funny, because some people think like, oh, if I'm not getting a collectible, or I'm not getting some type of new weapon or something new to add to my arsenal, like, is it worth exploring? And it's like, well, this game and some more narrative focused games, their version of gameplay is exploration and story. So what's your reward for exploring? It's more story. You're collecting more tidbits, more parts of the story.
And this reminds me a game that I don't remember if you played it, Josh, but it's Outer Wilds.
Yes,
and
I have.
Yeah, of course. Oh, yeah, of course you have. And it comes up all the time in my podcast. The episode I recorded yesterday, the guest even mentioned Outer Wilds again. It's just, yeah, it comes up everywhere. But it is the same concept. Like in Outer Wilds, you explore, and your push forward is information. Like your rewards are pieces of information. So you find them and you use them to progress and find new information, then brings you to the end of the game and allows you to understand exactly what happened in this solar system or something. It's the same gameplay principle, it's the same design principle, but I think when it comes to...
that's elevated a little bit more, and I don't want to go into it because I do want to do an episode on Outer Wilds, like, desperately. So, but I agree with you. Sorry, continue your point.
Absolutely. Outer Wilds is a lot more fleshed out, of course, a lot more polished and refined. It's like a very well-rounded experience. In the case
I
of
almost feel like it's an iteration on this style of storytelling.
Yeah, exactly. I think the problem we're seeing when those people complain that some players complain that I'm not getting a weapon for my arsenal and such. I think it's because we've been kind of educated to think that way by game design over the years. Like you do play a game, and usually you get a gameplay reward, like an item or something that you can use, and you're not used to seeing information or good information, good narrative pieces as a reward that you can actually go away and do something with. Whereas in games like this, it all rotates around that.
I agree 100%. And I think that it kind of clicked with me in this, that the gameplay, the reason why this game works as a game, and it's not just an interactive movie, is that your reward for gameplay, like the feedback loop that this game is offering, is you have this really compelling story. So the game like has you explore around and interact with different objects, and your reward for exploration is more narrative. So you still feel like you're playing a game because you are the one collecting. It's using story as a collectible, which I never really thought of before. Like, I know it's been done a bunch before, but for some reason, literally, I'm not even kidding, dude, like in the moment of us recording right now, I'm like, oh, so I guess they're using narrative as a collectible as opposed to a coin or a banana or some other thing that you might see in like a platformer, and that's y'all know I'm a huge platformer fan, so that's not any shade thrown at platformers.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
It's just, I had never really thought about narrative being a collectible, and that's kind of what this game is doing in a sense. And literally, as you collect the mementos, which are those 5 pieces I mentioned before that allow you to unlock the next memory, it literally is having you collect story bits by having mementos be the physical objects as representations of the bridge to the next memory.
And actually, as you mentioned, that there are a lot of games that do narrative as collectibles as well already, but we just don't see them as such. Like when there are maybe Metroidvanias who give you pieces of lore if you explore, then that is technically a narrative collectible, but you don't really perceive it as something that you put in as a collectible because you don't necessarily put it in your inventory. Or if you do, maybe you leave it there and then don't ever come back. So yeah, I think that To the Moon, it definitely wasn't the first game to do it, but it was one of the games doing it very well at the time.
Well, I think it's one of the games that used that as its core gameplay mechanic. I'm not saying it's also the first to do that, but it's one of the ones that like really made that like a viable option, like helped prove that it is a viable option to make games like this. Walking sims, I feel like actually can owe a credit to the Moon in a sense, because walking sims have a lot more in common with that in terms of how they tell their narrative, obviously in a first person perspective usually, but you get the idea. Firewatch, one of my favorite games of all time, is it rewards you for exploring around and seeing bits of context. In fact, when I had the voice actress of Delilah from Firewatch, Cissy Jones, on my show, she told a section. I asked her what's one of her favorite lines from the game, and she mentioned something that I never got to see because I didn't play that. I didn't explore that one area of the woods. And I really think that games like this, in a weird sense, are important for me specifically, and I think important in general because it shows that there's different types of genres that aren't really explored enough. But I'm so used to being like, when I play a game, I just want to get from point A to point B. It needs to be economical. These games aren't meant to be economical. You are meant to take your time and explore and allow yourself to get immersed in a world. And I am bad at doing that. It's something that
I like the economical term. Yeah, I think it's very accurate.
Well, I feel like I have to be like, I need to extract as much value as possible out of this. And instead of like allowing story to be the value, I'm so much thinking as like, I need to get to the next level. I need to be able to beat this boss. I'm thinking of very standard, stereotypical milestones, and games like this kind of force you to. It honestly, it works because it's a short game. It's only 5 to 6 hours long. But it was so compelling. Like, I was planning on splitting this up over the course of a couple nights, beat it in one sitting. I stayed up way too fucking late. I streamed from like 7:30 p.m. until like midnight, or like 12:30, almost 1 o'clock in the morning. On a weeknight, I had to get up in less than 5 hours by the time I went to bed. I was so tired, but just to put it in perspective, listeners, that's how much I really enjoyed this game. I do want to move over to story now, though. We've danced around it, and I'll be completely honest, dude. I am so surprised we got nearly 40 minutes. I mean, after some edits and some coughing fits that I'm going to edit out, we got nearly 40 minutes on just gameplay, which props to us, man. Like I should maybe that's not like a polite thing to do on your own podcast, but I'm really happy that we were able to do that.
No, but it's really great. Yeah, no, but I mean it's because there are some hidden layers to the Moon's gameplay, and it is what it is. We know it is what it is, and people who have played it and may be listening to this podcast now, they will know what we mean by saying it is what it is. But at the same time, there are things that, of course, Kangao is a good game designer in his own way. He has his own style, and even his future games, like his following games, A Bird Story, Imposter Factory, and Finding Paradise. There's other games in the To the Moon series. They kind of follow the same structure. They may change a few things, but still it is very much story, and gameplay comes second. Story first and gameplay comes second. It's a style, but it works because he puts all of himself into the story that he's writing and is able to let the players make that personal connections with him. So yeah.
One last thing, I know I said we're about to move into story. One last thing I do want to at least bring up, the music for the game. The music
absolutely.
Phenomenal score, phenomenal soundtrack, all composed by Kangao, who actually started as in a music background. He also had an artist named Lara Shigihara to help with I think the vocal song. There's like the one song that has vocals in it in this game. And she helps with that, excuse me. So yes, he began as his background as in game design didn't begin with game design, it began with music composition, and he kind of, moved that on over into this. Love the soundtrack. I don't know. I don't really have. Honestly, I'm bad at dissecting music. It's not my thing, but I love it. What do you have to add with it?
I have way too much to add to music, but what I'm going to say is that I still to this day I can't listen to the Four River theme without feeling like my eyes are watering up and just feeling all clogged up and such, because it's such a beautiful theme.
You can add more to it. You don't have to hold back just for this. If you have more to say, sir,
okay,
this is a
then,
podcast.
I think
this is a podcast. I'm saying I don't have a lot to say not because I want to move along, because literally I'm just bad at describing music.
Well, so I think when I played To the Moon, I was still in high school, I believe. It was 2010, and it was around the time I started studying music. And so, of course, I was captured by this soundtrack. Of course, I was captured by what it was trying to say. It's so emotional. It's so deep. And like the piano line and the piano score and the whole, Four Rivers theme, but also there are a couple different variations of that theme as well. Like there are also the little kids who are playing it in duo, and four hands. I think it said. I think you would say in piano and music terms. But they're playing it together, and it adds depth to that theme. And then when you hear it alone, it's the good thing about it. I think. I'm not sure how many listeners will be into music or soundtracks or game music and such, but I think a good theme is such when it is when you build up to it, and the moment it is released, it all comes together and it hits you with all its power and all its I would say all its soul even, and that's what For River in this case, but all of the soundtrack around To the Moon does. It builds up to that final moment, which we will dive into in the spoilery section. And then once it actually plays, you're there and you're ready for it. And the whole soundtrack has contributed to that moment and led you to that very emotional moment towards the end. And it's one of the things that I love about music in games. It's one of the many tools that game designers have at their disposal to tell the story they want to tell. And then if it comes together nicely, then you have a beautiful, amazing, unforgettable experience like To the Moon. And I think that's what the music in To the Moon does.
That was wonderful. I mean this sincerely. I really wish I was that eloquent at describing music. For someone who talks way too freaking much, both in life and on this podcast and on other podcasts, I don't think I could have ever said that as eloquently. So
thank you. I think there was a lot of fluff there, but thank you so much, sir. Yeah.
What are you talking about? It was beautiful. You almost made me cry with that description. All right, let's dive into the story now, though. I think this is a good
the story. Yeah.
So, listeners, for those who have not played this game, this is your spoiler wall warning. The rest of this episode will be discussions on this game. So once again, I'm going to have Anthony give his plug for those ducking out right now. The Indie Diarist, go check out his podcast. Anthony, where can people find you on social media real quick before anyone ducking out for this spoiler wall leaves?
Okay, of course. So you can find me on Twitter at, X. God damn it! At the Indie Diarist. That's the. I know, right? I know, man. Yeah. You can find me on X at the Indie Diarist. That's my handle, and it's the same handle on pretty much every social platform I'm on. I'm also on Instagram, but only because I needed a Threads account. So actually, I'm a bit more active on Threads. Same handle, the Indie Diarist. But I'm mostly active on Twitter. That's where I host Trailer Tuesdays, which was Wednesdays, all of that stuff. That's where I share whenever a new episode comes live, and that's where I interact with all the indie game development community a lot more. I have more plans for the future, but yeah, that's where you can find me. And then, of course, you can find all of these links at theindiediarist.com.
All right. So with all that said, listeners, we are going to dive into the story. We are now behind the spoiler wall. No, that sounds very ominous for like this really heartfelt game. I don't even know where to begin with this one, dude. There is so much to this story, to this game. I think specifically, I don't want to go beat by beat for it because I feel like that'll kind of ruin the experience for those who maybe there are still going to be people who listen to this and who don't care about the spoilers and will still listen to this. I actually know a handful of people who've told me that, so I don't want to completely go beat by beat because I feel like that will ruin it a little bit more. Plus, it makes it a little bit harder to go through. But what I will say is like, I think where we should begin is why Johnny wants to go to the moon in the first place.
Which is the core of the story, but also the very thing that it only gets revealed at the very end, and that is a very nice touch from Kan Gao there.
Yes, because that's the whole crux of the story, right? And I think actually the first thing here's an even better way. The first thing that jumped out to me about this story is how they tell the narrative. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the movie Memento. Also another, I think that was Christopher Nolan who did that as well. I've never seen Memento, but for those who don't know, Memento, it's a movie that was kind of experimental for its time. And in all honesty, I don't really see too many that do it like this. But essentially, the way Memento tells a story is that it jumps back and forth between different times, different portions of the movie story. So it's almost like if you have a story that goes from A to Z, right? In the beginning of the movie, they're showing the Z portion of the story and the A portion of the story, and they switch back and forth. And then once they move up to the second part, the B section, then it jumps up to the Y. So it's like it's coming from two ends. You see the very end of the story and you see the very beginning, and the movie ends in the middle of its overall narrative.
Yeah.
That's not what this game does, but it does do the thing where it will reference things, like specifically in the first memory. Johnny is you find out about his dying wife, that her last wish is that he takes care of this person called Anya, or who you think is a person, which we find out in a little bit. And this scene, this opening scene right here, gave me all I needed to know about the narrative, in a sense, of like how this game is going to treat it, where I thought Anya was like a child they lost, because the whole thing, like, there is,
exactly.
That's what I thought. Like, is it a child they lost? Like, who is Anya, and why do they keep referencing her? It's Anya is actually not really anyone. It is a lighthouse. And what I love about this game, and I referenced it before with it wasn't pickles, it was pickled olives, my mistake.
The pickled olives, yeah. Sure.
Yes. All of the mementos that we mentioned, they you collect, all have something to do. They all tie in with the overall, with the big reveal at the end. It's so hard to discuss this narrative without going beat by beat, but I feel like it would be boring to go beat by beat,
I think maybe I think we can approach it in a slightly different way, which is the themes that this story deals with. I think we've already referenced them at the beginning, like all the sense of loss and the sense of impending death and regrets and dying wishes. But I think, as you mentioned, I like the kind of comparison that you made with Memento, because it is very similar. It is pretty much living the whole story of Johnny from the end to the beginning, and it does jump around a few times. Sometimes it goes back, sometimes it returns. But it's the thing that I like about To the Moon is that every single character feels human. They are flawed. They have their flaws. They have their problems. They have their issues, and they have their struggles. And the way that Kan Gao deals with that is incredibly human in itself, because it shows you how River was dealing with loss herself, how Johnny was dealing with loss, how the two came together, and why that was problematic for the two of them. So it shows you also that sometimes people find each other, and it may not be the best choice for them, or it may not look like the best choice for them, but then in the end, it's the only thing that they can do, and maybe they're destined to be with each other at some point. And there are a lot of different themes that play into the story. There's loss, there's that. So there's so much.
Then let's do this. I think you're on the right track with this. And I'm sorry, listeners, if we're kind of jumping all over the place. I think this is how we can do this. Let's talk about what the big plot twist is, what the big story, like just a condensed version of all the spoilers, and then we can use that to dive into the themes of it, because I think the themes are really where the meat of this is, as well as just like the emotional narrative of it. So Johnny, you discover more of his world. You find out that Anya is a lighthouse where him and his wife River got married. You find out over the course of the game that River may be on the spectrum or may have some type of learning disability. I think on the spectrum is what they kind of allude to and what they hint at, because she's very blunt. She doesn't quite understand sarcasm. She's very literal and stuff like that. And it doesn't really cause too many issues, but Johnny loves her nonetheless. There is a character, I am blanking on the character's name, but they are friends with Johnny and River, and it's one of my favorite moments where basically the reason you find out River even might be on the spectrum or something like that is that she's diagnosed with it in one of the flashbacks, but in middle age, years after her and Johnny have been married. And their one friend, which I feel awful that I can't remember their name. I'm going to try to find like a character list on the wiki while I'm speaking. But she says she envies River because this girl that I'm talking about is basically like, she also is on the spectrum or something like that. And she envies her because she has had to fake who she is for her entire life. She understands how the way she views the world could be perceived, and how it could be perceived publicly. I don't know if they mean that by like being rude or whatnot, but she sees the world very differently, and so does River. Whereas this girl, which I feel so frustrated that I can't remember her name. Is it Roxanne? Is it it's Isabel. Yeah. Isabel is the person that I'm thinking of, and Izzy, as she's affectionately called, also is diagnosed with autism, or is on the spectrum, and she was diagnosed earlier, as opposed to River, who didn't get diagnosed until years into her life, until she was middle aged. And Isabel laments at one point in the game about how she's envious that like River got to always be her authentic self. Like, yes, she may be considered like socially awkward to others, but she never was told that she had to compromise herself to fit in with the general public. And Isabel really regrets that, to the point where like she knows that she's putting on a mask, but she's put on the mask for so long she doesn't know who the real Isabel is anymore. And that's such a heavy theme, man. And this is once again done in 16-bit visuals. And I love that moment so much just because it, like I said at the top, it really gets me thinking. And that's just one of the themes that I find really interesting, where it's like when you put on a mask so long, it just becomes who you are. Like, do you really believe that at your core? Or have you changed? Like, has your core changed, or have you just become so conditioned that you just hide the core of your being? Like, there's so much to unwrap with that bit of dialogue.
Yeah, that one bit of dialogue. Yeah, there are a lot of things that we could say about it. I think this brings to mind a book from Italian literature, which many listeners may not know about, from a very famous Italian author called Pirandello, Luigi Pirandello, and his book is called One Nobody and 1,000, something like that. No, 100,000. One No One in 100,000 or something like that. I believe it would be translated that way in Italian, and it's basically about the same thing. It's about a man who realizes that he's been putting on a mask for pretty much all of his life, and with that realization, he starts thinking about how other people see him. He starts obsessing over little details, like he sees maybe his nose being a bit too big, but then he starts thinking about whether other people see it the same way. It's all about masks. It's all about wearing masks to please others and to just and what it means to be your true self in public. To many people, that book has been life-changing, and I think it dives into a very similar theme as this. And I do kind of agree, to go back to your question, that if you do wear on a mask for too long, then you kind of start forgetting who you really were, but also maybe not, because it's something that I've personally felt myself. I feel like I was a completely different person when I was in university. I was a lot more introvert, a lot more shy and all of that. I still feel like I'm an introvert now, But I'm on a podcast, and I founded a podcast, and I'm a writer, and I just do a lot of different things online, and I'm actually enjoying it. Have I changed? Am I just putting on a mask? I don't think I will ever know. But I think my essence is still there, and as long as I know that, that's going to make a massive difference in the way I approach things.
Well, I think just to use your own life that you described there, not that I know all your life experiences, but like I wouldn't consider that a mask in the sense of, because a mask I feel like is something that the world puts on you almost, where you want to fit in, so you do these things in order to, like, you mask yourself in order to fit in with whatever group you want to be a part of, whatever group you want to include yourself in.
But I forgot to mention that part actually, because I felt that to get to where I am now, I have gradually put on masks to fit in. Whereas instead of being the kind of self that I felt like I was, so that was the missing connection there. But I do feel like that has happened to me, and so I can see why Izzy would feel that way in the game.
I see.
And the interesting thing is that we're talking about Izzy as if she were a real person. Now we're starting to talk about them as they were real people, and that is the beauty of Kangao's writing and how he approached story in general. Like the fact that he was able to dive into the humanity of these characters and show their most flawed selves. It's something that you don't see very often in games, because usually you see very heroic characters. Well, not always, but you do see very heroic characters.
Maybe
people
stoic
who want to
as well, like
stoic
almost,
characters and such. Yeah, so people who are just very classic, very squared in some ways. Whereas we all know that humans are flawed. We all know that humans have their own struggles and issues, and To the Moon is able to convey that so well through even secondary characters such as Izzy. And that's why I love the writing and the story in this game so much.
And the crazy thing is, all of that that we just talked about is literally just based off of one line from Izzy. We haven't even told you anything really else about her. She does have more lines than that, but that's the one that just sticks out to me. Some of the other stuff that you find out about Johnny's life, though, so the tragedy of Johnny's life, there's a couple different things. We're going to start with the pre-plot twist stuff. So he marries a girl. I think it's almost easier to tell it in actual chronological order than trying to tell it in game order, because the game order is what makes it interesting. But the actual story itself is also relatively interesting. He meets this girl named River and falls in love. He asks her out on a date, and you do find out that apparently he originally asked her out for some, do you know what reason it was? Because he admits it later on to River, saying, like, I only really asked you out because I wanted you to help me with something. Like, basically he wanted to use her for like some, like, she had connections to something, or she was really good at some one type of thing, and then he ended up actually really liking her, and they ended up getting married and stuff. But initially he only wanted to speak to her over, I forget why. I don't know if it was a prank. I don't know if it was for her to help him with something. It's just kind of like, I don't know if it's even ever touched on, other than the fact that he apologizes for it, and then his friend mentions, like, that's fucked up that you're only like asking her out to use her for this and this, or something like that. But they don't ever say what's this and this.
Basically, I believe, and my memory is a bit muddled there on the details, but I'm pretty sure they met in school, and so they were well, did they? But technically, in the first
twist.
part, exactly, in the first part of the game, you learn that they met in school for the first time, technically. And he asked her out, and yes, there is that exchange with his friend, maybe on the stairway or on the staircase. Sorry, and the chatting, and I think it was just to, not necessarily because she had connections, maybe because of her status, maybe. Oh no, I remember now. I think he found her interesting because she looked weird or something. She was like different.
That. I'm actually off the wiki. Yeah. Off the wiki, he was attracted to her because she wasn't the same as everyone else. She handled things differently. So that was his reason. It was more or less just. It's weird that I don't understand. So here we go. Johnny's opinion about her only make it harder. Johnny pressed on, saying that he wanted her because she had what he needed, to which Nicholas said was cold of him. I don't understand what she needed, what he needed.
I think it's like an abstract line there. I think it's more like she had what he needed, in the sense that she had that
She was
difference
different.
that was lacking in his life. That can, not necessarily in a material plane, but definitely in terms of behavior or perspectives on life and that kind of stuff. And then he ended up liking her, as you say, and they went out, and then they got married and all of that. But yeah, and that's and the story is pretty much that one, as you said, in a chronological order. They meet in school. Technically, they go out, they get married. Then there are a lot of different things, such as maybe the lighthouse, and a lot of beautiful scenes. They get married in the lighthouse, or in front of the lighthouse, and they build their whole life around it. And then there's the diagnosis, and then River's life just starting to slip away.
She makes an odd decision where they have the money to save her. They have the money to do it, but she values more that lighthouse. She would rather Johnny continue to build. So they're building their dream home right by the lighthouse they got married at, like on the cliff above the lighthouse they got married at. And when River gets her diagnosis that she is terminal, she would rather not spend the money on her. She would rather Johnny spend the money on finishing the house, and she won't have it any other way. It's very odd. And all throughout the story, she carries along this platypus doll, like this little stuffed animal that's been with her the entire time, and it's very odd. It's never drawn attention to, but it's actually super important to the overall story. And
it's everywhere, so you can see it in backgrounds and such as you go through the game. Sometimes it's more prominent, sometimes it's actually a prop, one of the mementos that you have to collect. But other times it's just there in the background, but it's always constantly there, something that River carries with her at all times. And then there's the weird, not weird, but there's that kind of digression into paper bunnies, if I remember right.
Yes,
and she has like a full basement of paper bunnies.
And there's different ones. There's like yellow and blue ones, and then there's just regular origami rabbits. And it's creepy when you first see them because you don't know all the context yet. You're exploring the mansion, this house that Johnny has built. And you get down in the basement, and there's just a room of paper origami rabbits. Like, and it's just it's really creepy. They do a really good job in 16-bit graphics to build that mood and build that atmosphere for you, because it's eerie. You don't know why the room's just filled with paper, like paper rabbits. So there's these things that kind of go along around. And each memento that you collect has something to do with the story, some in minor ways, some in more serious ways. And some of them are double fakes because of the plot twist. So you find out that River is the one making all these origami rabbits. You still don't know why. On the day of their wedding, they accidentally run over a rabbit. And River is heartbroken about this.
Yeah.
And so you think, this is where the for some reason, why is this dead rabbit, like it leaves you with more mystery. You see this, like, okay, so this clearly like affected her, but why is a random bit of roadkill, while sad, something years later still traumatizing River, and she's crafting all these origami rabbits. And then so the game leaves you with a bunch of questions, and you're not quite sure. And what you find out is that they get Ava and Neil go far enough back to where all of a sudden there's a memory they can't access. Yeah. And you don't know why. And so they're like, well, that should be enough. Like, we went back pretty damn far. Why don't we just mess with the memories here, and we'll see if it's actually able to get him. We'll put some things in place, and that should be enough that at the end of his life he will remember going to the moon. So they do everything, they check it out, nothing's changed. There's some minor tweaks, but overall, it's still the same kind of tragic life of like Johnny and River living, like getting married, finding out about the autism diagnosis, and then, River's cancer diagnosis or whatever she has, and then not wanting to get the treatment and all that other stuff. And one of the things that River says on like close to her deathbed is that she keeps making these rabbits, and she's like, what do you see when you see these rabbits? And he's like, I see a rabbit. I don't know what you're asking me this for. And it's really weird. She harps on it a lot, and you're really confused as to why she is harping on it so much. And throughout some of Johnny's other memories, you also meet his mother, who for some reason calls him a different name. You never quite understand why until the end. You do understand at the end why she calls him it, but she calls him Joey randomly, and Johnny is like, oh, that was my grandfather's name, and she just sometimes gets the two of us confused. But you do get a weird vibe from his mom still, even with that. She seems not all there, which is a little odd. So all of these things, River making rabbits that you don't know why, where does this platypus come from? Johnny also really likes pickled olives, and they keep referencing it. It's kind of this funny joke, like, why do you like pickled olives? He's like, I don't know, I just do, and stuff like that. Like all these random things, pickled olives and the platypus and the origami bunnies and his mom calling him Joey. All of these things come back together at the very end in this big plot twist. So far, you've had a couple minor ones, learning what the lighthouse is, and why River has a bizarre choice of choosing to die to save a lighthouse, essentially, which is very strange, or choosing to die so that way Johnny can watch over the lighthouse forever. But that gets us to the big plot twist. So Anthony, go into it, my friend. What happened here? Like, why was that memory blocked, and what big reveal are we given here?
So this is when you start understanding exactly what is causing all of these issues to Johnny, and all these memory issues and such. And that's because there's a pretty dark moment in Johnny's history, in Johnny's past, when he was a kid. That one morning, he and his brother were just playing outside of their house, and I think they were playing football or something like that. In any case, there was a ball involved, and when his brother Joey went to pick up the ball in front of their mother's car, the mother, reversing, accidentally killed poor little Joy in front of Johnny's eyes, which means that memory has stuck with Johnny for the rest of his life, but kind of hidden, because the memory that Rosaline and Watts couldn't access was exactly this, which was just some memory issues, the consequence of some memory issues caused by Johnny's mother giving beta blockers to her son, because she couldn't live with the with the guilt of having killed her own son, and also she wanted to help Johnny in her own way, I suppose. But that causes a lot of issues for Johnny, who starts forgetting things, starts even forgetting one very important person that he'd met way before meeting her in school.
Yes.
And of course, that person is exactly River, as we will find out. And it's from there, after all of these mysteries and after all of these minor plot twists, we start finding out why Johnny is so obsessed with going to the moon and reaching the moon. But even before we get into that, we start looking at how much trauma was in this poor person's life after all that he's been through, and also from the very beginning of his life, which is when that little scene with his dead brother happened. And before then, I think it was before then, or shortly after, or the timeline isn't too clear about that, if I remember right. But basically, he and River actually had met at a fair of some sorts.
Yep.
They just went on. They just went watching the stars, and River had her platypus with her already. Actually,
Johnny won the platypus. He was mad at his twin brother Joey because Joey got the prize that he wanted. He wanted a train set, and Joey got the train set, and he didn't. He was pissed off about it.
Yeah, exactly. I remember now. Yeah,
and he won the platypus and gave it to River when they were looking at stars together.
And already you can see a lot of things coming together. Him giving the platypus to River, who carries it for all of her life.
Even
And
stuff with Joey. Sorry, just real quick. The pickled olives. You find out that Johnny used to not like pickled olives, and it was Joey's favorite. So the fact that Johnny loves pickled olives after this beta blocker thing, it seems to me like his memory's creeping back out. It's his memory of Joey loving the pickled olives, and Tommy ends up loving them for the rest of his life.
I think it's Johnny. Yeah, but I think it's a mixture of that, but also the fact that with his mother calling him Joey and all of that, the two lives of like the two people, Joey and Johnny, started blending together. Yep. So like some bits maybe of Joey's personality kind of seeped into Johnny's life as well. So including the pickled olives, and that is just one element of his life, one element of that forgotten past that still pretty much, it starts to surface later on in life, to resurface later on in Johnny's life, but it's there, it's latent, it's dormant and waiting to be awakened. And then so as I was saying, Johnny wins the platypus and gives it to River, and River then carries it for the rest of her life wherever she goes, basically. But what they do, and that is the clue of the game before reaching that beautiful ending, they just sit on the grass, watching the stars and dreaming about going to the moon. And actually, I believe it is River that says that she wanted to go to the moon, or that that she wanted to go to the moon together with Johnny one day.
Yes.
And that is where the entire thing unfolds, and that is when Rosaline and Watts start understanding actually what Johnny's life means and where that wish comes from. And they make a pretty interesting choice, and I'll let you... actually, Rosaline makes a pretty interesting choice, which, of course, is debatable, and Watts doesn't even agree that much, but I'll let you jump in, Josh. What is the choices Rosaline makes? Yeah,
so now this is where one of the other big kind of moral thematic elements comes in. What's the right thing to do here? They are contractually obligated to make Johnny go to the moon. So, like you said, Anthony, they're sitting in the grass watching the stars, and River describes the stars as the way she imagines them before she was told they were big balls of gas. And Johnny even makes a joke about how, like, oh, that's just something parents are lying to you about. It's a conspiracy, I say. She describes them as lighthouses that are taking millions of miles away, lighthouses that are shining their lights on us. Hence why Anya means so much to her, the lighthouse, because it's her star that she cares very much for. They find their own constellation. They find the shape of a bunny, and the belly of the bunny is the moon. And so that means a whole bunch of stuff all at once. At the very end of the conversation, Johnny agrees that if he ever forgets where to meet her, they'll meet at the moon.
Yeah.
As this cute little thing of their constellation. That's why he wants to go to the moon. The moon also plays into the origami rabbits I mentioned before, because the constellation they make is a rabbit. And like I said, the stomach is a bunny. Yeah. So it starts off with white origami rabbits, but then she makes blue rabbits with kind of like an off-white color stomach, kind of the color of the moon in the moonlight. So that's why all of this just ties back together. I think that's what's so beautiful about this story, is that all of the threads that they put together, like, you find out where the platypus fits in. You find out why she's obsessed with rabbits and why these origami rabbits. To the moon literally just means the fact that that's where they promised to meet when they were kids. The pickled olives are a reference to Joey, Johnny. I keep saying Tommy. I don't know why I keep saying that. Johnny's dead twin brother. There is so many things that reference back to it, and that's what I think is so brilliant about the writing, is that you think you've figured it out. Like, okay, there was a dead rabbit. It's a little weird that River was obsessed with a dead rabbit, but okay, all right, Tommy really, fuck's sake, Johnny likes pickled olives. All right, that's odd, but okay, you can like pickled olives, and then the platypus, everything that you think is kind of odd and goofy gets tied back again. It's really cool how that works.
And I think the Kangao here does something really interesting, which is, first, it leaves some threads lose, so that then they come together. They come together at the end, like the platypus. I believe it only stays. It remains a mystery until the very end. You just know that this is River's favorite stuffed toy until you see the actual scene at the fair. But also, what he does is he gives you an answer to a mystery that he sets up, but then he shows you actually that answer is wrong. It's something else. And it keeps expanding on that mystery, and it keeps expanding on that answer as well. So you end up with so many different explanations. And I think the one thing that I'm thinking about right now, thinking about the scene on the grass and the moon and the bunny, they are like 5 different small elements, 5 different small things that in a single scene then get sprinkled across all of Johnny's and River's life. And they become significant moments that keep coming back. And it shows you how, I think it's a fascinating way to show you how humans think and how they reflect and how they process information over time. Like, there are always things from your past that keep coming up and that keep pushing you forward. And you maybe don't really know exactly why, but they are there, and they may be hidden. They may be somewhere where even you don't know how to get, but they are there, and they will give you some reason, some motivation to go forward that maybe pushes you to do whatever you want to do. And that means also in this case that Johnny and River, and I was about to say Tommy there, Johnny and River.
I've ruined it for everybody.
Johnny and River end up meeting again in high school, and then and this is where finally everything happens. So Rosaline, the choice that I was hinting at is that Rosaline actually, because they are contractually obligated to
take him to the moon. But actually, Watts says, no, actually, all he wants is just to stay with River for the rest of his life or something like that. And Rosalie makes the choice. She realizes that the only thing preventing Johnny from getting to the moon is the presence of River in his life. And Johnny's life would have been a lot different without River, without all that trauma and without all those things that River carried with herself. So she decides to actually erase River entirely from Johnny's life, except she doesn't do it 100%. What happens then is that after you see this incredibly emotional scene where basically River gets erased from all the memories that you've seen during the game, which is heartbreaking, and you're there with your eyes swollen and just being, no, why, please? You get to that point, and then you see, maybe you're even angry, and I remember I was. This is an emotion that I remember very clearly. I was very mad towards the end that River was being erased, and then she just appears again after Johnny does all of his things to get into the NASA or just to get into space and get to the moon, and she appears again in that same room, and they end up going on the shuttle together and going to the moon together. And that's when the game ends with Johnny flatlining. Yep. And it's like with River's theme playing in the background, and just everything comes together at once. And you don't really understand much because you're probably in tears at that point. But it just, you go with the flow, and it carries you to the end in such a beautiful way with those beautiful notes and that beautiful music. And you get to the end and you feel like, fuck, this was an incredible experience. And all the themes, all the ethics, all the past trauma and backstory. Basically, this game teaches you how to tell a backstory without it being too exposition-y or being too heavy on the actual user gamer reader. What I find fascinating about this ending too is that it still doesn't make it seem like Ava's choice is necessarily the correct one. It's like, it's a bizarre combination of like, this might not be moral, but it's also not necessarily immoral, because I think that's what I love so much about this ending, is that it leaves me with a very ambiguous feeling, in the sense that I can't determine if what I would have done in Ava's shoes, followed the contract to a T. And in honestly doing so, she did a beautiful job of that, where in
Yeah.
Johnny's last dying memory is that his brother never died. They wrote books together. Like he wrote a book about his brother, and that did well. River and him and got to go to the moon, and they ended up getting married.
Oh, it's true, because what Rosalind does is actually replace River with with Joy in most memories. Like she places Joy as dead brother, and so she makes it feel like Joy and Johnny had a beautiful life together as brothers, and they never really got split. So that's even more powerful. And then in the end, it still comes together all the same.
Yeah, because
yeah.
you do see flash forwards of this new memory past the To the Moon launch, that how the game ends, and River and him are married, and they kind of live a similar-ish life after the moon. It's almost like the only thing that really changed is that they literally went to the moon. So it was this bizarre combination of like River and him still getting to live their life, but also going to the moon. But at the same time, you don't really necessarily have all the heartbreaking stuff. It's really strange where it's like, do you want to erase someone's painful memories in the sense of giving them new ones, but also those painful memories might come with like what I think is so incredible about the storytelling in this is that there's so much devotion almost to River. Like River is the focal point of everything in Johnny's life. Even in the fictional made up thing that Ava did, it all comes back to River. And it almost feels like what Gal was saying is like River, at least in this story, is inevitable. Like she's always going to be in Johnny's life. Like this, they're soulmates, and their life is a little bit tragic. But the problem is that you're only seeing it in like 10-year increments, so all the good times in between, like the wedding's really beautiful, but then obviously River gets sick, and there's also like once she finds out that Johnny only wanted to meet her because of this, which kind of I think clues into her, like meet her because she was different, which kind of clues into her like, oh, he doesn't even remember anything. Like she knows he doesn't remember, and she can't say anything about it to him, so she's trying to trigger the memory with their first meeting with the origami rabbits, and the whole, that's why she asked him like, what do you think when you see this, and he's saying a rabbit when she wants him to say like to the moon. I don't know, man. It's beautiful. I'm still not sure like what the right choice would have been. Like part of me would have been like, well, that was his life. You just erased his life. But the other half is he had a happier memory, and he was on his deathbed anyway. So who does it hurt?
And you know what, man? I think what this game tries to teach you is that there is no right or wrong choice. Like everything else in this game, it's all in the middle. It's all a gray area. There is no black or white. This is one possible choice, the choice that Rosalind made and Watts made, and that they lived with it. And this brought Johnny some happiness at the end of his life. And that's probably the most beautiful thing that they could have done. And I think, and to that point, actually, do we also want to talk about how beautiful the chemistry between Rosalind and Watts is, and how they carry the entire story, the comical verve of Watts, and how it works well with Rosalind's more serious and professional side, and how the two blend together, and how they work so well together, and then how Watts is a bit more emotional, well she's a bit more rational, and those sides actually surface towards the end when Rosalind wants to erase River, but Watts feels like it's not the right thing to do. And there are a lot of other themes in this game which are about love, about fate, about predestiny, about soulmates, about trauma, about dealing with the past, about flawed humans. There's just so much in such a small little game, so much passion, so much love that Kangao was able to pour into this To the Moon little experience, that really you can see why I put it in one of my top 5, 7, 10 favorite games of all time.
100%.
So, yeah.
I think that's a good way to kind of wrap up our thoughts on the themes, is that the overall thing that Gao is able to do in his writing is literally just all of these characters feel real. They feel fully fleshed out within one or two lines. We mentioned already with Isabel how we're just the fact that she has that one conversation about wishing she could live her life as free as River does. you see so much humanity in that one line, and everything about this story, just from like, I still like, the reason I think I'm so conflicted is like all of the things that tie back as to the platypus and the origami rabbit. Like, River is such a beautiful character, because she holds on to this love she has for Johnny, even though she doesn't quite know the quote unquote normal way to express it, because she has her own way of doing so. And it's just charming to think that, not charming, it's just I'm getting emotional just thinking about like all the, like, she kept trying to make rabbit. She kept trying to reach out to Johnny, like to get him to remember, like she cares about him so much. And you can tell like she's learned enough by the end of the movie end of the game, where she is speaking to him a lot more casually, a lot more, I don't know. She feels like she's learned more how to speak with Johnny throughout her life. And it's just, I don't know, this whole game is just wonderful. It was just such a wonderful experience. And dude, thank you so much for asking to cover this game on the show, because I probably would not have played it anytime soon. I think it is worth bringing up real quick. There is some DLC bonus bits to this. There's a DLC
absolutely.
called Finding Paradise, which I have not played. I think there's also one more, right?
So there are actually 2 DLCs for To the Moon, and they're like mini episodes, they're called on Steam. And then there's a bird story, which is like a connecting episode, which is about 1 hour, 2 hour long, without any dialogues. It's also an incredibly beautiful thing. But it dives into another story that then ties into Finding Paradise. And you can see that character coming back. And then there's Imposter Factory. So there are like 2 sequels to the Moon. I believe there's another one in the works, and the 2 mini DLCs for To the Moon itself, which dive into Watts and Rosaline's work at the Sigmund Corp. So I think they're like half an hour each, so really quick, but they show you a little bit more mystery, a little bit more of the corporate side of things and how they're handling things with other patients, other clients at Sigmund Corp. So yeah, I do recommend playing the whole series because it's just so incredibly compelling. And also there's a card game coming up, I think.
I think I read that, yeah.
Yeah, Kangao is about to open his Kickstarter for that one specifically, and doing like a tabletop cardboard game about To the Moon, which I'm probably going to back with every single penny in my wallet if I can. So yeah, but yeah, to wrap it up on the story, I suppose, and the themes, all the ethics, and should we do this? Should we not? Should we rewrite an entire man's memories? I think what makes these people feel human, as you say, is in the writing. And like a lot of people try to do that. But these characters show self-reflection. They show that they understand their own flaws. They show that they want something and they need something. And in storytelling, that's the most important thing that you can do, to show their journeys as they try to get to that place and then beyond. And Izzy herself showing that she's envious about or jealous of River for being able to be herself and such, shows you so much depth, as you said, in just one line. And there aren't many writers out there who can do that. So kudos to Kangao for doing such an amazing little game. And the others are also good. So Josh, if you have time, do catch up because you will enjoy them.
I believe, what's the one, a bird story you said? I actually was gifted this by my good friend Jala. So Jala, thank you once again. I will be playing this at some point. So she was watching me play To the Moon, and she mentioned this as well. So she sent me a gift on Steam, which was incredibly nice of her. So I am going to have to play this game very soon. So let's wrap up this episode though, man. This was a wonderful conversation, and I really enjoyed it. And it's one of those things where, like, I guarantee you people, honestly, you could do this. I don't think I'm not as good of a writer as you are, but I feel like you could do an entire series on just the thematic elements of this game. Like I mean, I really got fixated on Isabel's thing, but there's so many different things that you could dive into. You could do like a multi-part series probably on all the different themes and elements within this game. And I hope this episode, for those listening, at least gave a nice overview of it. It was like a nice a kind of round overall discussion about the themes and elements and gameplay and whatnot. So this was a wonderful discussion, Anthony. Thank you so much for joining me.
No worries, Josh.
Listeners, you can find him over at the Indie Diarist, indiediarist.com. Is there anything else you'd like to promote, though, Anthony, before I let you go?
Well, yeah. So I guess, again, if you want to check out the show, of course, you will do me a great favor. I would appreciate that so much. As I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, I'm just by the time this episode comes out, my Patreon will be live as well. So if you do enjoy my show and want to support me, please feel free to check it out. But also, if there's one episode that I think you should listen to give you a sense of what the show is about, is the one with Kelsey Beecham, the narrative designer of Outer Wilds. That still makes me very proud today, and it's one of my most popular episodes ever. So yeah, and you can find links to the show, as Josh said, on the indiediarist.com, links to socials, links to all my pages. And also, I believe there is a link to the episode with Kelsey. So you can find that one over there, readily available for you. But that's it, really. And absolutely, Josh, it's been a pleasure being on your show, and I hope we do this again because it's been amazing. But yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for also accepting to do our collab episode together. Oh yeah, but of course that
will be coming out later this month. That episode,
of course, will be coming out. Will be coming out. I did double check. Will come out on the 14th of August. So yeah. So nearly around the time this episode should come out for most of your listeners.
Just a little over a week after this one drops.
Yeah, exactly. And it will be about the story, the history of indie games, and the impact of indie games on game culture. And we did a very nice discussion there. It was a lovely episode, that one too. So yeah.
All right. Thank you thank you, man. I'm looking forward to that one dropping, and thank you for inviting me on your show. For my own stuff, you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or X, Instagram, Threads, at StillLoadingPod on all of them. I'm also over at Blue Sky now, at StillLoadingPod.
Oh yeah, that's
Blue
true.
Sky. I finally got that.
I don't really use it though. Yeah.
No, there's too many. So it was nice when everything was just either Instagram or Twitter. Now that everything's diluted. And thanks, Musk, you piece of shit. Anyway,
I totally second this opinion, by the way.
Oh my God. I won't harp on that. This is a video game podcast, not me giving my opinion of billionaires. But anyway, okay. If you want to support the show, you can do it in a number of ways. You can give it a 5-star rating or review on Apple Podcast or whichever podcasting app you use, because it makes me feel warm and fuzzy. And if the legends are to be believed, it pleases the algorithm gods and it helps more people find the show. I don't know if that's true. I've been told mixed things, but either way, it makes me feel warm and fuzzy. If you want to support the show monetarily, I have a bunch of cool perks for you over at patreon.com/stillloadingpod. For $1 a month, you'll get all the episodes a few days early at a better audio quality, as well as voting rights to help me pick future episodes of the show with quarterly polls. There is also a $4 tier, which does everything at the $1 tier, plus 2 bonus episodes a month where I discuss retro gaming magazines, first impressions on games that I'll be covering later on in the show, stuff like that. So that's for the $4 level. And finally, for the $5 level, you'll get everything I mentioned prior, plus access to Still Bonding, which is a James Bond podcast where 2 friends bond over 007. Well, me and a bunch of friends bond over 007. Each of those episodes are 2.5 to 3 hours long. And right now, at the time this comes out, we have Moonraker is the most recent episode that was released, but in a mere week and a half, there will be an episode, or actually, I'm sorry, at the time this episode drops, later on this week, Friday, August 11th, there will be an episode on For Your Eyes Only coming out, which is already recorded, and I'm almost done editing it already, which is fantastic. So, patreon.com/stillloadingpod, but the most important shout out is the Bit by Bit Foundation. The Bit by Bit Foundation is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to put video games and video game consoles in the hands of kids receiving inpatient care at hospitals. So if you want to support them and help kids at hospitals get to play games while they're getting their treatments and whatnot, please go to bitbybitfoundation.org and consider donating. That is all the time I have for you on this episode of the show. Thank you all so much for listening. Anthony, thank you once again for joining me. With all of that said, I will see you all next time.